You're listening to the Relationships Uncomplicated podcast. Relationship advice so valuable, you won't believe it's free. And now your host, relationship expert, Edith Chironi.
Welcome back to another episode of Relationships Uncomplicated podcast, episode 66. I'm your host, Edith Chironi, and today we're talking about women's affairs and how to end them without falling on your face. In my work with couples in the aftermath of infidelity, I often see the need to heal the relationship, to regain trust, to help the hurt partner, and so on and so forth. But one of the things we tend to ignore, in my opinion, is the unfaithful partner's own psyche, especially when an affair is or was involved. It is almost never talked about in sessions. So unless the therapist asks, which would be me, how are you doing with ending your affair? Do you need help with that? It is probably going to never be spoken of. Now, when it comes to women's affairs, there's even more silence around that. And that's where my guest comes in. My guest today is Debbie Rose. She's the blogger of a popular blog written primarily for unfaithful wives and also helps the betrayed husbands called aftermyaffair.com. The reason I invited Debbie on the show is because of her unique understanding and approach to infidelity in general, but also to women's infidelity in particular. I learned about Debbie's incredible work when she reached out to me because we're both part of the same group on Facebook. I really liked her approach, and we scheduled to talk really soon after that little introduction. And in our conversation, I learned that Debbie relates to such an important aspect of affair recovery that is usually not attended to. And by utilizing her own personal experience, she writes and helps unfaithful wives as well as betrayed husbands in their journey to healing. I just had to have her on the show, and I'm thrilled that she agreed to do this interview and to tell her incredible story and shed some light on what so many women out there struggle with. And I can't wait for all of you to listen to her and learn from her. Okay, so let's dive right into my interview with Debbie Rose. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Edith. So happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you share about your specific niche in helping women who have been unfaithful, and I'm beyond excited that you agreed to share with my listeners the steps involved in ending an affair. This episode is going to be so insightful. So I know you have so much to give to my listeners, but before we go anywhere, I'd love it if you could share some background about yourself, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, yeah. As you mentioned in the beginning, I have a blog, and I write for women particularly who were unfaithful, trying to help them truly end their affairs and begin the healing process, not only for themselves, but their marriages, and gotten very good feedback. There are a lot of very hurting women out there. So I also have a private Facebook group for the unfaithful wife who are looking for support and encouragement, and that is called AMA Women. Very inconspicuous name, but it is just for the wife who was unfaithful.
Yes, and we're going to put a link to your group on the show notes.
Great.
If that's okay, of course. Okay, so how did you get into this particular niche, helping unfaithful wives?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my story is 12 years ago, after 19 years of marriage and 3 beautiful children, I did what I really never thought I was going to be capable of doing. I was unfaithful to my husband, and adding to that, I have been a Christian since I was 17 years old. And I've had a strong relationship with the Lord. And so I really never expected that I would be somebody who would have an affair. So that is part of my story. And as you know, infidelity is not easy to overcome in marriage. And most marriages don't survive. A lot of them don't. Some of them do, obviously. Mm-hmm. But we did survive, and we're married 31 years now, and our children are grown. Yeah, and we have 3 beautiful grandchildren, and the biggest blessing is we get to be grandparents together while still married.
Yes.
So we just have an encouraging story of restoration and redemption, and I wanted to share that. I know that a lot of couples are very discouraged, thinking that they are not going to make it, and so I just felt on my heart I wanted to start this blog 3 years ago. So
inspiring.
Yeah.
And could you share what didn't work for you? Because I know before the show, we kind of talked about some things that you tried to do. And one of the things that you tried to do was go to couples counseling. And you told me a little bit about how it kind of didn't work for you. So I know a lot of my listeners are, thinking about maybe going for couples therapy, and I'm a couples therapist, and I specialize in helping people in the aftermath of infidelity. But I do know that there are some, therapists out there that are not as helpful. So I think it would be great if you could share what didn't work for you.
Sure.
And maybe, people can learn from that what to look for when they go to therapy.
Right. Yeah. Well, we were not really well equipped to know how to find the right marriage counselor. I just assumed, well, any marriage counselor will be able to help us. And we went through 3 different marriage counseling experiences, and they were each a disaster in their own way. So the first one saw us both individually and then together for many months. And after a couple of months, it was apparent that she was really not able to separate her own personal feelings and bias against me, as the unfaithful spouse. So I had just shared so much, and that didn't end up being very pretty. I felt more shamed afterwards. So that was
so what you shared with her individually, that impacted her. The way that she related to you.
Yes.
When you joined the session.
Yes.
We had a joint session. That's what I meant.
Yes. And even calling me later. It was just a lot of very weird things, just calling me later and telling me how terrible person I was. And so the next counselor, we'd been traumatized from that. We went to the next one, and she got very angry at us at the second session, because we weren't doing exactly what she wanted us to do. She wanted us to separate, adamantly told us to separate. We had already done that, and so she was very upset with us, and it didn't end up pretty at all either. So and I realized later that it really is important to find a therapist like yourself who does specialize in infidelity. It's just a different beast, it's a different thing. And you really need somebody who knows how to deal with that, not just all the problems from your marriage. It's deal with this first, as you know. And so that's why I so appreciate the work that you do for couples and the program that you've created that we've talked about together, and just the clear path that you've given for couples to heal their marriage. I think it's very, very important.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know what to tell you about what you had to suffer. I mean, this is re-traumatizing, sounds like, for both of you. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through something like this, but definitely someone that wants to work with couples in the aftermath of infidelity has to understand a few basic things. It's not your agenda, the therapist's agenda, and it's not what you tell the people to do. You kind of have to follow, first of all, listen to them, hear what they want to do. And then, guide. And the other thing is, there are biases. I have my own. It's we're human.
Right.
But you need to learn, to put your bias on a shelf and, as you walk into the room and, just be aware that you have that and be very careful.
Right.
I mean, that's like the ABC of doing
of being marriage counselor. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry that you had to go through this. And if anybody is listening and is actively looking for a couples therapist for infidelity, for the aftermath of infidelity, I would definitely urge you to ask a lot of questions about what first of all, the specialty of the therapist, and second of all, what is their path, and how they would lead you through whatever it is that you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you speak mostly to women, and yes. I wanted to ask you, why talk to women specifically?
Well, I think there's not a lot written for the wife who was the unfaithful spouse. There's more now, but 12 years ago when I was going through this, the information for wives who were unfaithful was just very limited. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that made me feel more isolated and more alone, because I thought, geez, maybe there aren't that many women and I'm just this awful, terrible one out there. And where is everybody else, So, usually when I was reading information, I had to switch the gender of what I was reading. It would be like the unfaithful husband and the betrayed wife. And I would just try to apply what they were saying to our situation. And it, it is different. In some ways it's the same, but in some ways it's very different. And it was really hard on my husband as well, as a betrayed husband, to know, men often feel like this affects their manhood, and mm-hmm. why couldn't they keep their wives at home? And it's just a little different as a betrayed husband as well. So
yes, that makes so much sense. And really, we do see that women kind of close the gap, and there's more infidelity that women mm-hmm. are the unfaithful partners. So we definitely see that. So I'm not surprised that before maybe there wasn't a lot written about it. So I'm happy that you decided to write for those women. And by the way, is that what made you decide to start your blog? Yes.
Just my own personal experience. And I mean, let's be real. It's not easy to write about your biggest life regret, particularly when it's adultery. Mm-hmm. And even after a couple of years now, it's still not an easy thing to do. It's gotten easier, but I do it because I there's so many hurting women and husbands, and there's so many that resonate with my story and appreciate that somebody's speaking for them. And so that is why I do what I do. And really, society, I think, as a whole, has conditioned the mindset, well, men will be men. And even today, 2019, it's still overall more acceptable for a man to cheat. Not that it's ever okay, but there is an underlying theme that it's usually the husband, and it's, like I said, it's never okay for anyone to have an affair, obviously, but I do believe there's more shame when it's a woman who was unfaithful. There's just a different element of shame to that, and women do feel that. They definitely feel that shame upon themselves.
Yeah. It's like, how dare you as a woman,
Right. And the betrayed husbands too, they have their own kind of shame, like I mentioned. And there's a whole process that they have to go through as well, because as a man, you are supposed to keep your wife there, and they put a lot on themselves thinking that they weren't enough. And we'll talk about that a little bit too, of why women have affairs. But a lot of the men that I talk to, the husbands, they definitely think it's something wrong with them. So,
yeah. Okay. So, I mean, like I said before, it's really true that the gap is closing. And I can see that by the amount of calls that I'm getting from couples where the wife was the unfaithful partner. And, maybe if years ago it wasn't like that, I can see more and more of those calls. So I totally see what you're talking about. Okay. So, Debbie, what do you see as the common reasons women are having affairs?
Well, I think it's true many times that an affair is a symptom of another problem. Many people, though, have the assumption that it's always representative of the problem in a marriage or with their spouse. But it's what I've learned over the years is it's not always about the marriage. So it's a common thought I hear all the time is, husbands will think, or other people will think, if she had what she needed at home, why would she go anywhere else?
Right.
And many women are even confused about their own reasons for their affair. And I was too. It didn't make sense to me 12 years ago because I had a wonderful husband. I had 3 great kids, the house, the cars, the dog, the American dream, and everything I was supposed to have to be happy. And I got married at 19. I was a stay-at-home mom. And, we went through some stressful seasons in our marriage before the affair, a couple of years before the affair. But I wouldn't say I was unhappy with my husband by any means. I certainly wasn't prepared to think that I would be vulnerable to having an affair. But the common themes that I see for why women are having affairs, particularly in their middle life years, doesn't mean everybody in the midlife, but this is a common theme that I see, that they cheated for reasons within themselves, feeling like they are lost their attractiveness, wondering if they're still desirable. A lot of them have said boredom, always giving to others and not really for themselves. Many women, many of us as women, we've spent so much of our lives taking care of everyone else, being a mom, being a wife, being a caretaker. Yeah. And many women now are in the workplace, and so they have more temptation there as well. And so many have told me that they've just lost themselves along the way. And I would also say that was probably the same for me as well.
And when you say many women told me, I know that you have a lot of women that are in the group that share those things with you, but who else do you talk to?
Yeah, good point. I have coached, mentored, whatever you want to say, a lot of different women through particularly the last year and a half. And so private phone calls, just working with them one-on-one. And you hear a common theme over time, Obviously everybody's got different stories, but I would say there's a thread of commonality in a lot of the women's experiences. Yeah. So, and a lot of them were overall content in their marriage. And the other thing is a lot of what goes on in society is we think these are terrible women, terrible people. And what I have found is they're usually very good, kind-hearted women. Yes. Very opposite of what people would think, but many of them got pulled in by the attention of another man. And a lot of times it has started because they had compassion for this person and they didn't have proper boundaries, and they might have been going through something, the other man, and so they've just let down a guard and hit a particularly vulnerable time, maybe within themselves, or extra stress upon the marriage before they fell into the affair. So there's usually a setup of things that happen, and many of them are wanting to escape their normal life. And you and I have talked about this quote, or this, what Esther Perel says that I love. She says, it's usually not really about sex. It's about desire, about receiving attention from someone else and reconnecting with parts of themselves that they lost or never knew existed. Yes. And I really, really appreciate her saying that, because it is usually about this part of yourself that you lost, and you're trying to find that way again. And not in a healthy path, obviously, but it happens before they even realize it. They got buried over routines and kids and family roles, and maybe the two partners lost sight of how to keep connected in their marriage. And it's a slow process, definitely.
Yes, I'm so happy that you talk about this and you mention this, because it is true. I see it all the time where, I don't know the exact percentage to tell you, but when I ask couples, or when we get to the point where we kind of realize why this happened in our relationship, then sometimes it is about the relationship. Sometimes it is a message to the partner or to the relationship saying, hey, this is not working, hasn't been working for me.
Right.
But maybe 50%, or maybe even more, it's not really about the relationship. It's really about a personal journey that the person took, exactly like you're describing, to reconnect with a part of themselves. Maybe they were, a really good girl that always helped around the house. And then she became a mom and she had to continue to do those things. And at some point in her life, she just didn't want to be the good girl anymore. She just needed to find herself, something different about herself. And maybe it's the person that helped people all their lives and just took care of people. And all of a sudden he wants to be taken care of. So, right? So it's definitely not always about something wrong in their relationship or something wrong in the personality of the person, because that's something that I hear all the time. There must be something wrong with your personality, or maybe you're narcissistic or anything or something like that, that there's something, or maybe something happened to you in your childhood. And really, when you look at research, most infidelities have to do with either a message to the relationship, either a journey, a personal journey that a person takes, and in almost all of them, it has to do with a prior disconnection or conflict avoidance that created some type of a disconnection. And it doesn't mean that the relationship wasn't good. It just meant that the connection between the couple wasn't as strong as normally it would be.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point. I think that we often do think that it's the couple or it's the person or it's the personality. And I even heard that from somebody that I had shared right after my infidelity. And she thought, well, there's something defective in you, And I think what happens, though, when we do that is we separate, well, those are the bad people and these are the good people. And what happens, and I think it's natural for humans to do that so that we can not feel vulnerable. But the reality is, what I really believe is we are all vulnerable to it. I mean, not everybody is going to fall into that or make that terrible choice, but we are all vulnerable to different sins or whatever you might have want to call them. We all can do what we don't think we could possibly do. And
absolutely. And we're going to talk about it because I have a question to actually ask you. How are good women, good-hearted, nice women actually get caught in having affairs?
Yeah. Well, I think like I said, I think a lot of people, including women, and maybe even the most vulnerable are the ones that are the good girls, because I identify with that. I was always a very good girl, very good, toe the line, do what I was told all my life. And then being a Christian woman, well, that added an extra level of, I could never do that because I'm a Christian. So I think what happens, well, first of all, I think you're the most vulnerable when you say, I would never do that. There's a pride there, and pride goes before the fall, that saying. And when we think that, we're letting our guard down and not realizing the vulnerabilities that we might have in our life or the boundaries that we're not setting with an opposite sex friend or something. So I see that a lot. But how women are slowly having this happen is it is a one little compromise after another. It's a crossing boundary.
Before you continue, Debbie, I want to stress what you just said, because I think it's such an important message. When you tell yourself, I would never do that, I mean, could you elaborate a little bit more on that almost naive belief of I'd never do that, or this is not going to happen in my marriage? I see infidelity as the ultimate trap of deception. It starts out with the unfaithful spouse being deceived themselves. So someone goes from thinking I would never do that, and then what?
Yeah, it's a very slow process usually with many women. Because you're already thinking, I would never do that, you're not realizing the red flags that are waving in front of your face, hey, don't have that conversation with that other man about your marriage. That is one red flag I have seen. You're sharing intimate details with somebody of the opposite sex about your marriage problems, or many times it starts out as an emotional affair. They were friends, and all of a sudden that friendship inches closer and closer to a line that it shouldn't be crossed. But we're often so naive in thinking, well, I can handle this.
Yeah.
Because we went into everything going, I would never do that, So I think when we're honest with ourselves, we all can do things we didn't think we could do. And once we realize that as a people, as society, Christian community, whatever community you're in, I think everybody needs to kind of come to that realization that, hey, we're human and we can fall and there's no excuse. But it also, we need to wake up to this fact that let's set some clear boundaries in our marriage and go, hey, we're not going to go to that dinner with that man by ourselves, or have that conversation that's inappropriate to have with somebody that's not our spouse. So that kind of a thing.
Yes. And when I hear you say that, I cannot not think about the book, Not Just Friends by Shirley Glass.
Yeah.
And she talks exactly about that. She has a theory backed up by research where she basically talks about, she calls it the slippery slope between a friendship and a full-blown emotional or a physical affair. And I highly recommend this book if you want to learn more about that slippery slope. It looks like, you're going into this will never happen to me, and you go on that slippery slope and you find yourself in the middle of an affair.
Yes, I agree. And I read that book early on too, and it was very eye-opening. Many women and men too, they do this innocent flirting, they think. And then all of a sudden you're having an emotional connection with this person. And then the next step is just little steps. And the next step is, now you're hiding it. So I always define infidelity as anything that you're keeping secret from your spouse, because we do semantics many times. Well, I'm not really having an affair because I haven't had sex with this person. But really, infidelity at its core is secrecy. And so if you have to hide texts or conversations from your spouse that you're having with somebody else, that's a huge red flag that I think a lot of people need to definitely realize that. Yeah,
I agree 100%. And I think in the book, she also has a quiz or a couple of quizzes that will tell you whether you're having, just a friendship or a beginning of something.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And I did a post like that on my website as well. 34 questions to find out. And I don't know, it just kind of poured out of me. Like, what are some things that we all lie to ourselves about? What are some statements that we're making or things we're doing that, really are eye-openers that we don't realize, or we're putting ourselves in jeopardy of an affair.
So
and really it's the what's going on in women is it's the fantasy world of the affair, right? It's the this is an escape for them, or it's okay, I'm not nobody's going to get hurt because nobody will know kind of trap. And it really
nobody
is a
knows
trap.
I'm not doing anything wrong.
Yeah. Well, and in our hearts, we know that it's wrong, but we can justify so much as we're going down that road. And that's the trap. And I think of affairs as traps. They totally are traps. We think we're okay and we can handle it. But what happens is they get swept up in the intensity of the affair, the brain chemicals, the dopamine, all of that's happening while they're with their affair partner. And it creates this illusion of this soul connection and this relationship, limerence, or whatever you want to call that. And they think it'll always be like this with this person. It's so wonderful, right? I mean, you probably have, and it's always going to be like this. So what happens is they don't look at what they normally would have looked at. The red flags, the character flaws in this person that they're all of a sudden now really minimizing, not noticing. That happens very often in an affair. The affair partners only see the good things in the other person and not the real red flags and problems that they might have as they continue this relationship. So,
yeah, and I think you mentioned that you call that affair fog.
Yes, a lot of people out there do call it the affair fog. And affair partners, if they've read anything, they usually know, and they go, oh, yeah, I've been in this fog. I think you can read about that. I have a post about that as well. And many identify, but who wants to admit that, well, what I was feeling was really just an illusion? It's very hard to come out of this fog.
Very hard.
Yeah, you think this person was, everything, and some people are ready to give up their marriages.
I know.
Yeah.
I definitely had some cases where I sat with the partner who was being unfaithful, and kind of trying to compare the two, the lover with the spouse, to see which relationship to keep.
Yeah.
And when you do that. When you do that on your own, it's really hard to think beyond that. But when you do that with a therapist, at least what I would do, or what I said to this person, is, do you really think you can compare, your spouse, whom you have a full life with, you have a family with, you share finances, you share daily burdens and hardships, with a relationship that consists of mostly, stolen hours of pure fun and indulgence?
Mm-hmm.
How can you compare the two? Of course, the other person would look much happier, light, no problems, always smiling. It's very, very, these are just not non-comparable.
Right, exactly. And it happens all the time, though. I think it's so often when you're in an affair, it's your reality is skewed, and how many people are giving up their marriages, like you said, for those stolen hours. And that is part of the fog. And another word that I use for fog is just deception. It's just a deception. And who, when they're deceived, thinks they're deceived, right? When you're deceived, you don't think you are. And so my challenge is always to try to show women, hey, let's look at this, because I was that woman. I really was ready. It boggles my mind now, but I was ready, wondering if I should get a divorce and be with this person. And now I think, what was I thinking? I would have been miserable. Wow. But at the time, it looked real. It seemed real. And I think that's the message that I so always want to drive home is, don't ruin your life for this. If you can save your marriage and help your kids to have a solid, intact family, and not ruin everything and throw it all away for this person that you really don't have a full picture of until you've lived years, like you said, go through family finances, go through years of trials, and see that person as they have their socks on the floor and you're annoyed. You don't live that way with an affair partner. We all show our best side. Yeah. So anyway.
So what happens to women once they start to come out of this affair fog?
Yeah, once the fog starts to lift, usually it's kind of slow, and we always want it to be overnight, but it's usually not overnight from what I've seen. It's little glimpses of, wait, look at this. Look, what did he just do? That's kind of weird. I don't think I would like that. And little glimpses of reality come in. But once that fog does lift, I can tell you it's a good thing, but it also is when the shame really starts to hit. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it over and over again, and I experienced it personally. When all of a sudden you decide, I'm not going to be with this person anymore. You go through what you have to end that, and we'll talk about how to do that. Right. But all of a sudden the shame hits, and they realize the extent of what they did. And it's a very difficult time, because now the destruction of the affair is obvious,
Yes, definitely. And so we'll talk more about the shame maybe later on, but I did want to bring up, the difference between what you do when you feel that shame, because shame is usually something that kind of freezes you. Mm-hmm. And, you feel bad, but there's almost nothing you can do about it. Yeah. Versus, something different. But we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, yeah.
If you don't I mean, I think now could be a really good time if you can give us or give my listeners some of those tips about, what's involved in a woman ending her affair the right way.
Yeah. $1 million question, right? So,
question.
yeah, I think that what happens is they realize when they decide, I got to end this affair, this is killing me inside, it's going to kill my marriage and my family, then they realize the real trap that they're in. And what seemed like an escape at first now becomes something that's not so easy to break free of. And I hear it over and over again. Again, I lived it. And there's a lot of information for unfaithful partners out there saying you need to end the affair and go no contact with your affair partner. And that's what you have to do. And that's true. It's the first thing that has to happen, especially for a marriage to ever try to be healed. But nobody really says how to do it. How do I end this? It just seems like a given, like just end your affair. But what happens is it's become like an addiction. It's become this habit, and it's not as easy to break free as they thought it would be. So that's why I'm very, very passionate about helping women learn how to truly end their affair for good. Because it's become, it's not a substance, but it's become like an addiction, and it's an addiction to a person. So.
Right. And I agree with you. I do see all over, people just throwing, sentences like just end the affair, which, okay, but the how do you do that? It's easy to say. And I think even many therapists they kind of condition the couples therapy. I think most couples therapists do that. I don't do it, but there's a condition that if you want to start couples therapy, then the affair has to end. First of all, as a condition, because it makes sense that it could be premature to start couples therapy if there's an affair going on.
Yes.
However, I think it's our job to also help the unfaithful partner end their affair, give them tools on, how to do that, and also check in with them. Their well-being is important here. And, if they get help on how to do that, which is exactly what you do for women, then, they might be able to end their affair and really start looking into their own relationship and healing it.
Yeah. It's very important. And that's kind of why I'm in the middle right now of developing a program, because I realize it's not just words to tell them, they need a process. And so part of, what I have shared with women and in the process of doing, like I said right now with my program, is practical steps of how to end the affair. There's a couple of key things that I've seen are involved. One of them is the mindset around this. They get stuck in the same looping, obsessive type of thoughts about their affair partner, and very hard to break free of that, but it is possible. It's just they have to learn how to manage their thoughts, not allow them to drift off and be obsessed about this person anymore. It's a very, very diligent process of intentionally stopping thoughts, because your thoughts, turn into feelings. And I teach them a lot about that. So the next thing I would say is ending an affair it's important that they don't do it in person. And so I do share with a lot of women about writing a letter or text. That is really the safest way that I've found to do this. If you try to break it off in person, you're just going to get sucked back into it. So I have a sample breakup letter on my website that a lot of them have used, and it's helpful. Yeah. And all access points where the affair partner could contact them again, that needs to be blocked. Any way of being able to resume the affair, phone calls, emails, any open doors like that need to be stopped and blocked. And again, though, that's one way. That is the
and what do you do when people think that they can reduce the relationship to a friendly relationship or to a cordial relationship.
Yeah, that never happens. It's never going to work. And many of us have tried, because it's like we go through that bargaining phase of grief almost like, well, if I could just remain friends, then we can still have each other in each other's lives. It never works. No. It inevitably, you're going to resume the affair again. And I think people underestimate the stronghold that an affair really is. I mean, it's definitely something that there's power and it wants to pull you back, and it happens in your mind in so many different ways. And trying to remain friends with somebody is just setting you up for failure. So that is a huge, huge thing too.
Yes, definitely. And I'm happy to hear that, everything that you say, I agree with 100%. And I also, in my program, maybe not as strongly, I dedicated one lesson to it. And I'm sure there's probably more that needs to be dedicated to this. But literally, going through all of those steps makes such a huge difference for people. And this part is only the technical part, right?
Right.
You talk about other parts.
Right. This is the technical part. But I also think it's very important to be aware of the lies, the excuses, the things that we believe that will set them up for relapse. Many of them talk about wanting to have closure. Like, I just need closure. I need to be able to find out why he did this, or I need to tell him this, or I feel bad for breaking it off. They feel bad for them. That's a very common thing too. Yeah. But all of that, I try to really show them, look, this is a lie that you're believing, because if you think that there's any such thing as closure, you're going to get sucked back into it again. Yes. So there's a lot of things that set them up for relapse that I try to, show them, and let's be careful here and not relapse into this again. The other part is the spiritual part of recovery, that really was a strong piece for me. I believe, just as a Christian, the spiritual battle that is going on behind the scenes. And for me, it was just, I had to call upon God and fill my mind with verses and encouragement on what kind of life I wanted to have, what kind of person I wanted to be. And I knew that the person I was becoming was not anybody I was proud of anymore, and so I did have to call upon my faith. And that's why faith is often a big part of recovery programs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just knowing that there's a power greater than yourself that needs to help you break free of this. So that was huge for me.
Definitely. And I want to ask you about that, but just before we continue, let's just summarize for my listeners exactly what the steps are. So would you just kind of outline that practical side of things?
Sure, yes. So the practical part would be ending it clearly, and that would be through a letter or text, even though people think, I can't text. Mm-hmm. That's the safest way to do it. So you want to do it on the safest way possible, not in person. The other is walking through cleaning house, I call it, getting rid of all the little trinkets and the little mementos that you have of this person. Those little things don't seem like a big deal, but they do keep you tied. There's another word for this, soul ties, all these little things that we keep us tied to that person. So I say, you got to clean house, you got to get rid of it. Those are the practical things, and blocking the person's number on your phone, not accepting if he tries to get a hold of you through social media. All those channels need to be blocked. They're kind of like doors that need to be closed. Let's be real, you could do all that and still resume contact, but you got to have those safeguards in place, because many times the other person will try to get in touch with you again. And if that is open and you're having a vulnerable moment, it's too easy to resume the affair again, if you didn't block. So
definitely. And even if you do it right, when you write that letter or text, you probably should also ask that the person does not try to contact you. I mean, you can ask and they won't do it, but I think it should be very clear, right?
Right.
This is your wish.
Yes.
And I would even go further to say, this is my wish because I'm working on my marriage.
Yes, that's an example of what I have in my sample breakup letter on my website. Is it's very clear, it's very to the point. There's no love so and so. There's no, you want to close the gap of any hope that you're giving to this person, because it's really not kind to try to give them hope that something will resume.
Yes.
So I always say, tell them that you're working on your marriage. You do not want to be contacted any further. And again, what the problem is, a lot of women are going to feel bad, especially as nurturing women, like, oh, I feel bad for him. But I always say, look, he knew what he was getting into if he knew you were married. Your husband didn't. Like, he didn't have a choice in this matter. So the compassion needs to be for your spouse, not for this other person. So that's the practical side, like you said, about ending it. But there's so much about the whole, we don't have time for it, but the whole thought process, the whole thought stopping, taking your thoughts captive, renewing your mind. There's so much about getting back into an affair that starts in our minds. So that's a huge, huge piece of it, I think.
And if anybody wants to find out more about this, they can find it in your website or contact you, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can give my website on the show notes, aftermyaffair.com. But I have so much free information and resources on there that they could learn a lot from that too.
There's definitely a mindset part to all of this. It's not just doing the technical things. There's also kind of mind control or
definitely changing your thoughts. The faith part that I shared, because some of this it gets to be so much bigger than what we can do in our own strength. So the faith part is important. I also think support is really important. And that's where my heart is, because so many women are trying to do this by themselves. They feel alone. Yes. They feel isolated. Who can you talk to? Especially as a woman who did the unthinkable, you feel by yourself. And so the support is huge. And that's why I did my Facebook group. I'm developing a membership course just so that people have a safe place to go and know that they're not going to be shamed, and encourage and have accountability with other people. I didn't have that. And I think that that was a huge piece I was missing. So that's important too.
So important. This is such a lonely place to be in for both partners. Yes. People don't want to share that with, family or good friends because they're afraid of being judged. And I understand that. So it's great that you do that you offer, this non-judgmental space for people.
Yeah. And let's be real. I mean, many friends and family are not going to understand. And I lost a lot of friends. I lost friends. But I also had a couple of very good friends who stood by our side. And I'm eternally grateful to them because they gave us hope. And so you do have to be careful who you share with, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you always have to find the people that are just going to be non-judgmental and are just going to be there for you, period.
Yes. Right.
And that they are for the marriage, not just, leave him or leave her or, don't stay with a cheater. Yeah.
Right. That is a common, I know you probably hear it too, but that is a common thing that many betrayed people hear is just leave her. And people told my husband, change the locks on her. And, I'm so glad he didn't listen to them. We're married 31 and a half years now. And thank God he didn't listen to them, that we did recover. We were able to find our way back. But you have to be very careful who you listen to. And I think that's an important part of this too. Yeah.
It's true. Listen to yourself mostly, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some of the biggest challenges for women who are unfaithful once they have ended it for good?
Yeah, I always say it's the shame, like we just talked about. Shame is really huge, and it's the guilt that follows the affair. Guilt, you can do something. Guilt can promote you to change, to act, to do something different. So guilt isn't always bad. Shame, what do you do with shame? Shame is like you're a terrible person and you can't ever change that if you think you're terrible. So a lot of the women are dealing with a lot of shame. And me too. I mean, that's probably the last piece of healing for me. And I still have moments where it comes in. Let's be honest, here I write about this every day. I talk to women all the time. But if I let shame come in, it'll definitely spiral down. And my shame was always recently, in more recent years, for my kids, like, gosh, how could I do that to my wonderful boys? I love them, and my husband. So when you start realizing what you did, shame can take you down. Yes. But I think that's learning how to overcome that piece and know that you're still worthy. You're still a wonderful person. You did a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. And that's the thing that's very hard to separate, especially in a society that hates cheaters for the most part. There's not a whole lot of compassion for the person who, ended up in the trap of the affair. There's not a lot of compassion. Right. But if they can hold on to, I'm going to change my life. And I think that's where a lot of the honor and the self-respect come back when you say, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be this person anymore. I want to change my life. And that's where the shame usually drops off a little bit more, because you're taking your life back,
Yeah. It turns into guilt.
Yes. Yeah.
And really the person that talks about it so clearly and wonderfully is Esther Perel. Yes. I mention her all the time because I really, really think she...
Oh, I love her. Yeah.
Yeah. She has a really amazing understanding of all of this, from, first of all, not simplifying it. It's not good or bad. There's so much in the middle.
Yes.
And she talks about shame versus guilt. And what, she says is that shame is a debilitating feeling because it keeps you from doing something about how you feel. And it leaves you basically dwelling in your own shame and self-hatred.
Right.
Whereas guilt, it's almost the same, right? Because you feel bad in both cases. But guilt is a feeling that actually honors your experience while sending you towards making it better and earning your partner's genuine forgiveness. So it's activating. It's making you active. And one of the things that I work with my couples on is to go from that shame towards the guilt, because if you're going to be stuck in shame, then you're not going to be able to hear what your partner is telling you. Right? You're just going to say, I can't believe I did this. I'm such a bad person. I'm a horrible person. Don't say it again. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to, hear so many, unfaithful partners sitting and saying, I don't want to talk about this ever again. Can we forget that this ever happened? And it's usually because they really are self-hating.
Right.
And then once they're able to move from that to guilt, yes, I did something horrible and I hurt my spouse, but that means that I need to do something about it. I need to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that. And how can you love your spouse if you hate yourself? So there is a process that you have to learn to forgive yourself, have compassion that you messed up. Okay, you did something you didn't think you could do, but how do we move to healing now? And I totally agree with you. If you're stuck in shame, you can't ever really have full empathy for your spouse because you don't want to hear it. We all go through that. Like, we don't want to talk about it anymore, but the betrayed really needs to process, and he needs his wife to listen and be able to face that, without sitting in the shame, like you said.
Oh, so true. Wow, Debbie, I think we could have probably continued to talk for 4 or 5 hours.
I know. Yes.
But, I really, really wanted to thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, you are such a ray of light and hope in this tough situation for many women and for many couples. So thank you so much for being here. And can you tell my listeners where they can find out more about you?
Yeah. Okay. So my website, again, is aftermyaffair.com, and they can access, I have a few ebooks there. I have a brand new ebook I just did on our story. So it's more about our personal story, and they can get that. And there's a couple other free resources I have there. And also the website, the Facebook group that I mentioned is AMA Women. And they just have to answer the few questions and be prepared to maybe have me talk to them to just validate that they're in the right space. But those are the two places that I always am. And if they ever need to reach out, they can always email me there too.
So good. Okay, so thanks again for being here. Bye, Debbie.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Of course. Bye-bye. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Debbie. Like I said, we probably could have continued this for hours, but I still hope that I got all the important questions you might have for her. This episode is packed with tips and ideas and a lot of information, so don't worry if you feel overwhelmed. Just take in what you can and then come back to it and listen again if you need to. All right, guys, so thank you so very much for tuning in. Don't forget that this episode is sponsored by my free masterclass all about infidelity recovery, edcharoni.com/masterclass. If you have not been healing and trust building, I can help you put your relationship on the right track to genuine forgiveness and trust earning so that gaining a loving relationship becomes a whole lot easier. edcharoni.com/masterclass.